My guest today is Fred, WW4LL. Fred has been part of the ham radio community his entire life. He's an avid DXer and competitive contester. He and co-owner W9SN, Steve, formed Beloud a few years ago as a way to provide access to remote stations, some that they own and some that they partner with hams around the world. I think you'll enjoy today's conversation.
Enormous signal here, buddy. You're 5.9 plus 40 dB.
Hi, Fred. Great to see you.
Good morning.
I was checking out your QRZ page and realized that you don't really have a lot on it about you. So why don't we start there? Tell us a little bit about your ham radio background.
I had an interest in amateur radio or two-way communication since I was a young boy, and I was back when the FCC actually made you get a license for citizens band. I actually got a license for CB and for 11 meters, and I put up an antenna on my mother and father's roof, and it was just a vertical antenna, and I started talking to people locally, and that just morphed into wanting to reach out to the world further, and I studied and got my amateur ticket through a local radio club in Muncie, Indiana, and I had an Elmer or someone who mentored me through that process, and So made my first contact on amateur radio with my mentor across town on Morse code on 40 meters, and got really excited then about that. And I never dreamed that we would be where we're at this level now of involvement in amateur radio, but it's been a blessing. It's been a great hobby.
So where was that? Was it in Georgia also, where you live now?
No. Actually, I lived in Muncie, Indiana at the time. My father worked on the railroad. He got transferred up there, and so I went through high school and started college there in Muncie. And then, after I got married, we moved to the Chicagoland area and worked in Chicago for about 17 years in total. And then I came to Georgia in 1995.
So how did Mom and Dad feel about antennas in the backyard?
Actually, it wasn't bad. They were receptive to it, and didn't have a tower or anything like that. Didn't have any big wire antennas hanging out of trees. I just had a simple fiberglass vertical with an element running through the fiberglass, and I strapped it to the chimney.
Pretty innocuous then. So
right.
Along that trajectory, somewhere you decided that DX and contesting was something you wanted to focus some energy on. When did that happen, and why?
It happened after I got married, actually, back in 71. I've been married to my wife now for 53 years, and 52 years, actually. But I put up a tower at the second home that we bought, which was there outside of Muncie in a suburb. And I put up a small tower, probably 50, 60 feet, something like that. And I put a small tri-band antenna on it. And back at that time, back in the mid-70s, the propagation was really good. And so, with 100 watts, you could work the world, and actually you could do it with less than that. But for me, having a 100-watt radio and a directional antenna that I could rotate, it was really exciting for me to work deep into Asia and work, Japan and Malaysia and Indonesia and all those countries that, you as a kid, you dream about and you read about, but until you get to be an adult, you never have the opportunity to experience that. And I ran across a lot of different people in the hobby. I remember as we were raising our children, at one point in time, our oldest son got into stamp collecting. And so I ran across a guy on the air one time who was from Ireland, and he was a whiskey barrel maker. I thought that was a unique craft, and we were talking about the family and what we did for a living and whatnot. And so told him that my oldest son was into stamp collecting, and I offered to send him some money, if he would send me some stamps from Ireland. And he said, no, he said, I'll send you the stamps. He said, you don't owe me any money. And so sure enough, some week later, whatever, the stamps arrived. And so you meet some really interesting people along the way. And the hobby is really immensely diverse in terms of what you can do in the hobby and the type of people that you meet in the hobby. I mean, I remember I always wanted to talk to Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater was an amateur operator, lived in Arizona, and was, of course, a U.S. Senator. And I thought that was pretty cool. And I got my license about the same time my business partner now, Steve Narducci, W9SN, he and his father and I all hung out together. We all shared the same interest in the hobby, and we actually lived in subdivisions that were adjacent to each other, and so we hung out quite a bit together. We operated each other's stations, and I remember when Steve's dad, Ken, worked Barry Goldwater, and he got that QSL confirmation, and I just thought that was really cool. And then so many other things, like I got into satellite communication for a while, and I remember I was able years ago to talk to the astronauts, via satellite communication, and then some direct path as well on HF, and got into tracking the telemetry of the satellites and that type of thing. And I do a lot of digital work right now. I do a lot of, what they call FT8, FT4, RTTY, and then I still do a little CW, and I do a lot of phone contests. So I moved away from all of the DX work and got into contest competition amongst amateurs around the world. That's been a lot of fun.
What year was that you got started with contesting?
I don't recall getting involved in contesting until I went back to Chicago to work for the second time, living in Valparaiso, Indiana, Northwest Indiana, and I met I met some guys up there that they were dabbling in contesting, and so I got involved with them, and we started contesting together and doing these multi-op contests. And the bug really bit me then, and so I put up a pretty large size tower up there, and multiple antennas on it. And before I was going to their homes to operate, and then when I put that up, they started gravitating to my house to operate. So it started back in about '83.
Okay. Well, I've got to tell you, in preparation for this conversation, I went to 3830 Scores to see what contests you've been involved with. I hit print, and I think 12 pages later, the printer finally stopped. I was amazed at how many contests you participated in. I think their scores went back to 2003, and there were a lot. You're a busy man.
Yeah. Like I've told my wife all these years, it keeps me out of the bars.
There you go. And you contest in several different modes, correct? RTTY, code, phone.
Right. Yep.
Do you have a preference?
Well, I like doing the phone competitions, although phone competitions depends on which ones you get into. If you get into the very large international ones like CQ Worldwide Phone, there's a lot of participation. There'll probably be over 3,000 amateurs that'll actually take the time to enter a log for the competition, and then there's countless other people who are just casual operators that participate in that as well. And so there's well over 3,000 amateurs around the world that participate in that single contest over one weekend, which is coming up the end of this month, by the way.
Which you're preparing for, I understand, correct?
Yes, doing a lot of preparation.
So you haven't been scared away by those thousands of people.
No. So, if you just very carefully pick your category, it's like, you don't take a pickup truck and race a Ferrari, So, we try to stay within our lane, and sometimes we get surprised, and sometimes we get to take a plaque home. So just got one in the mail yesterday, actually, but that was for a RTTY contest, which is considered digital, and I like those because I used to have, before COVID, I used to have a group of guys, still do, and we contest through remote amateur radio now, but because of COVID principally. But I had a group of guys who came here religiously and joined me for these multi-operator contests. And so, and I've had guys fly in from different parts of the country to operate, and a lot of guys are local here, but it's a lot of fun to have them over for those digital contests because there's just so much camaraderie there. We're bantering with each other, telling lies, and all those things that guys do when they get together. And so I really enjoy that part of the hobby, and I just love it. It's just something that I enjoy doing. I have, like I said, since a child, and I'll do it till I can't do it anymore.
I feel like we could go down the rabbit hole regarding contesting, and I want to do that at some point. But you mentioned Ferrari versus pickup truck. The station you build in Maine is close to Ferrari, is it not?
Yeah, it's kind of the Ferrari for us. We've got about a dozen stations in our Beloud remote network now, which, for those that don't know, that's a business that we formed about 2.5, 3 years ago, where we build radio stations. Some of them for our own use, and then some of them we acquired through agreements with people who had already built them to put them on our network and rent them out. And principally, it's for people who want to operate a higher end radio station that's got bigger antennas, better geography or geographic locations that facilitates operating certain parts of the world more so than from different parts of the U.S. For example, it's a lot easier to work Europe from Maine than it is from California, so or Missouri. So some people want to get on just to do a casual contact with a few people. Some people want to get on that main station to operate a lot of Europeans during a contest. And so we make that available to them where they can rent that station out just by logging on to a laptop or a desktop, and they can do that from anywhere in the world.
Now, my understanding, before you decided to make it available to other people, this was really for you and Steve to do contesting and DXing. It was a very personal choice for you to have that access. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was. I mean, to be honest about it, we were, we were not winning as many contests, operating from Georgia and Tennessee and Indiana is what we do now, operating from Maine. So, you had a couple of choices. You could sit around Georgia here and you could cry in your beer about it, or you could do something about it. And so Steve and I are at a point in life that we decided we were going to do something about it. So we went up there. Steve and his wife went up and they looked at a lot of property for us and looked at the internet service and how well, whether it was fiber or cable or whatever. We wanted some really good high-speed internet, and we ended up in northern Maine. Our station, we bought 15.5 acres of property just about 9/10 of a mile from the Canadian border in Aroostook County, just outside of Van Buren, Maine. And we we bought all the equipment, a couple of towers, and found a climber, and found crane companies and electricians and contractors, and we had to go up and grade the land, and we had to build a road into it and drainage ditches, and we had to start from scratch. And um, and so we built this station, and after the grade work and everything was done, and we used sea containers, we bought two new sea containers to house all of our radio equipment, and we've got them located 500 feet apart. So after we had that done, we bought the antennas from JK Antenna from Ken Garg, the owner, and Ken worked with us very closely and made the antennas tailored for our needs, and we've been very, very happy with those antennas and their performance. And we went up there, and we built that station in 30 days from the time the grade work was done. So my wife and I and a local friend of mine here, Mike, NN9DD. Mike came over and helped me pre-assemble elements for the antennas. We marked them. We loaded them up in my pickup truck, and we drove to Maine, and my wife went with me, and she sat there and she assembled antenna elements for me for 2 weeks before Steve came up to help us actually put them on the towers and hook everything up inside the sea containers. And I've got a photograph of her. She took a piece of cardboard from one of the antenna boxes and a permanent marker and wrote slave labor or something on there, and took a shot of that. But anyway, it's been exciting to build it from the ground up, and we got on and we started contesting from that station up there, and working into Europe from Maine is just phenomenally different. The signal strength's louder. You get to hear the band opening sooner. Operating from Maine, I can hear Europeans an hour and a half before I ever did in Georgia. And so that gives somebody operating from that location, a distinct advantage because in those major contests, about 67% of all your contacts come out of Europe. There's just a lot more amateurs in Europe than there are in the U.S.
It's an impressive story, Fred. I've got to take you back, though. When Steve made that trip up to Aroostook County, what did he tell the realtor? Like, I want 10 to 20 acres to put up a couple towers. I mean, people must have been scratching their head just like you are right now. Like, what were they thinking?
Yeah, so I found the realtor up there actually before Steve went up, and so I told him what we wanted to do, and told him what our requirements were for property, and he said, no problem. He said, I got a piece of software here. He said, I can plug in all those parameters. And he says, I'm going to, and it will send you emails automatically with all those listings. Every time one comes up, you're going to get an email. And we were besieged with properties that met that. There's a lot of land for sale in Maine. And it's cheap. And so, Steve, this is more detailed than what most people think. Steve was handling the emails coming in and was actually looking at those properties on Google Earth, and then he would take a piece of software that's out there that will evaluate the takeoff angles of a tower at a certain height from that grid or from that geographic location. And so he did all that homework first, and so he evaluated, which one. He narrowed the properties all down to a handful, and then he and his wife went up and looked at each one of them, and then we wanted to make sure that we didn't have a lot of neighbors and that sort of thing, and we wanted to make sure that we had good odds of getting city or county approval. And so we actually found a contractor who has a shop about, as the crow flies, a half a mile from where our station is. Turns out he's on the city board. So, we kind of put it in his hands, and he walked it through for us, and we got approval on everything. And obviously, we used him to do all of our work for us. And he's been a good friend as well. And anything we need, we just go over there, and he either takes care of it for us, or he'll give us something that we don't have, like a tool or whatever, and borrow it from him like a neighbor. And but Steve put a lot of thought into where that which one of those properties that we should acquire. And when we first started going up there, there's not much in that town. And so there's like one hardware store in town, and we were buying a lot of stuff from that hardware store, and they know whether you belong in that town or not. And so we had to introduce ourselves when we went in, and they're like, "Oh, you're those radio guys,"
Well, I
then, of
think
course,
I've mentioned to you that I grew up in Presque Isle in Aroostook
yeah.
County, so I know exactly what you're talking about. You drive into town, and people are turning their heads already, and it's within half an hour that most people know somebody new is in town, and certainly if you're doing a project of this magnitude. But, I need to point out, when we have talked out in the past, you do make it sound easy, that you and Steve came up with this idea, and you executed it, and here we are. We have this beautiful station. But I think it's important to emphasize the expertise, the technical expertise that went into it, and the relationship building, because you just don't do that in a rural community without shaking hands and getting people comfortable with you. So kudos to you, Fred and Steve.
Well, thank you. We went in there, and it's really ironic. We went over to meet with the police chief and wanted to introduce ourselves and tell him who we are and what we're doing, and told him that we live in Georgia and Tennessee, and could you please stop by every once in a while with a cruiser and check the property out and help us protect it. And he said, "I'm happy to." He said, "I'm November Whiskey 1 Pop." He said, "I'm a ham too."
That's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So you did not have to
Yes.
explain what the hobby was.
Did not. And then we were introduced by him to a Border Patrol agent, and believe it or not, the Border Patrol has a big presence right there on that river there that separates Canada and the U.S. And so between the two of them, they made a point of going by, and now the jurisdiction has changed. There's no longer a police department in Van Buren, and the sheriff's department handles that. Well, the sheriff has taken over those patrol responsibilities, and it was passed on to him by the former police chief that, please take a look at this property occasionally, and they do. And they've caught some hunters out there, even though it's posted. But they do keep an eye on it, and the people have been really good in the area. We've made some friends up there, and we stay in contact with them, whether we're there or not, whether we need them or not. We stay in contact with them. We talk to them about personal matters. We just have a personal relationship with them. So, and if they needed any help from us, we would be there for them. I love the area. I love Maine. I don't love those black flies, though.
Neither do I. Nor the cold when February comes along.
Right. Yeah, I was talking to a guy yesterday who lives, a guy who just started using our system with Beloud, and he's from Fort Worth area. And he said, I've been thinking about moving to Maine. And he says, I just don't know how I would take those winters. And I said, well, you might be surprised, they know how to handle snow up there, unlike Atlanta and Fort Worth. So I think you'd be all right.
No doubt. So you found the property, you've built the station, your wife and you were putting antennas together. What was the date that it went operational?
I think it was April of April of 20, I think.
Okay. And how soon did you come to the conclusion that you were going to make it available to other hams?
Well, I got to thinking about it, and I started looking at how much the investment was, and I said, told Steve, I said, we could use this occasionally for ourselves, but I said, we could do this as a business and write this all off. And so I went to see my CPA, and she gave it her blessing, and we took off with it. We filed the LLC, and we reached out to DX Engineering and kind of had a handshake agreement with them on acquiring equipment, and so they helped us a little bit with that, and excuse me, we started looking for locals up there to assist us, and like I said, crane companies, tower climbers. Turns out there's a tower climber that lives just south of us there in Caribou. So we've used him, and matter of fact, I was up in Maine, in Calais, Maine, in June, activating another new station, and we needed a tower climber, and so I got a hold of our guy, and he drove 3 hours south and helped us. He went up the tower and helped us get this station fixed and get it on the air. So.
So not to put you on the spot, but for those people who haven't gone to your website, what's the rundown of equipment that is there, particularly the antennas?
Oh, wow. Well, we've got 2 towers up, and on tower 1 we have 3 of these large tri-band antennas where you can operate 10, 15, and 20 meters, 3 different bands, and they are in what they refer to as a stack because they are in 3 levels. So you can electronically switch between the top by itself or the top middle, the top bottom, any combination of those 3 you can switch electronically, and you do that because of the propagation changes as the sun starts to come up over the horizon, and so early in the morning before the sun actually comes all the way up, you'll want all 3 of those antennas engaged to pick up any of the takeoff angles as the sun rises, and then as the sun's up and it's getting toward mid-morning, you might want to disengage that top antenna and just use the middle and the bottom, and that's just the way it works. Same thing on the other end at night, sunset. So then on that same tower 1, then there is a 4-element 40-meter beam. The average amateur does not own a 4-element beam. The average amateur actually owns a dipole on 40 meters, and several of them have 2 elements on 40 meters. But a 4-element 40 beam is a large antenna. It takes a stout tower and a stout mass tube, if you will, to mount it on. And up there, because of the ice, we use 3-inch chrome moly tubing to mount our antennas on. It doesn't matter how much wind we get there, they're not going to bend. And so they're a thick wall chrome moly, and they're very stout, so very rigid. And we don't have them sticking too far out of the top of the tower, and we use a real heavy-duty rotator electronically to control that, and we turn that with rotators that we get out of Texas, and then we use a piece of software called Node-RED that IBM developed, but it's now seeing more and more amateur application, and IBM kind of abandoned it. So it works very well. To send to actually put on the website, and gives the operator a graphical representation of where you want the antenna to go, and you click on that location or some preset, and it automatically goes in that direction. So we've got that. We've got ICOM radios up there. We're using PGXL amplifiers that are solid-state amplifiers that put out legal limit of 1,500 watts each. We've got one in each station, Tower 1 and Tower 2. Tower 1 antennas, the fixed antennas, are oriented toward Asia. So that tower is geared up to favor Asia, while we can work Europe with it as well. It's favoring Asia directionally. Tower 2 favors Europe. So we have the best of both worlds there. And we have the fixed antennas toward Europe, and then the rotating tower, you can put it in any direction you want. And you can, again, form those stacks and form different combinations. And so we have green heron rotor controllers that we send signals to those rotors via the internet. Tells the rotor which way to turn. We send signals through a Raspberry Pi. I've got one over here in the box, but it's just a small little device about that big, and it's got a chip in it. It's not a chip, it's a micro SD card that's that big, and it's got all the information that our software engineer programmed to operate the radio at that station. So, it's amazing. It still amazes me. I thought when I was a kid, I thought I was kind of bewildered by the magic of all of this, and as a 72-year-old man, I'm still bewildered by it. I can't imagine that you can operate a radio over a computer and there's no physical radio in front of you, and we're 1,000 miles away from that radio. And so it's just amazing to me. So, but you can, I take my wife to the beach down in the Gulf Coast, and she goes to the beach, and I set up in a condo, and, I got my laptop there, and I can operate any of these stations that I want. We just went on a cruise 2 years ago to Iceland, and we sailed up into the Arctic Circle, and I got on a satellite up there for internet when we were in the Arctic Circle, and I thought, well, just for giggles, I'm going to see if I can connect to our station on the island of Bonaire in the Caribbean. And sure enough, I did. And I communicated with people from that ship. Here I am setting up in cold temperatures and down there using a radio in the balmy Caribbean and talking to people. It just flabbergasted me.
Fred, talk to me about the operator setup. You've talked about a laptop. You just did, but what's involved when an operator wants to set up to use Beloud?
So right now we're on our Generation 2 radio, what I call our radio. That's our digital representation, our computerized representation of a radio. And so we're on Gen 2 of that. And so right now the way it is, we've got two small pieces of software that you have to download. You do not have to download virtually anything else, but you have to download these two pieces of software. It's on our website. It takes just a few seconds to download them. You open it up, and once you've got it downloaded and it's installed on your computer, you don't ever have to mess with it again. You don't have to download anything else. And we have a panel that when you log into our website, you can see the console. We call it the console, and it's got all of our radio stations listed on there. We have radio stations not only in Maine, but we've got them in Romania, in Madrid, Spain. We've got one at Bonaire that I referred to. We've got mine here just south of Atlanta, Georgia. Steve sits on a mountaintop in Tennessee, west of Knoxville. From his yard, you can overlook other mountaintops. So it's got a great elevation up there. We've got a station down at two stations down at Lafayette, Louisiana. There's one on the Atlantic coast of Florida. I got one in Arizona. Working on getting one in California. And the reason why that matters is to have this diverse group of stations that you can work different parts of the world more readily with those stations depending on where they're at. For example, when you work from the station on Bonaire, or you work from the station in Florida or in Louisiana, the propagation on certain bands like 10 meters is better there than it would be from Indiana or um, maybe Illinois. But the propagation from Illinois to Japan and the propagation from Arizona to Japan is better than what it is from Maine, because I have to point my antennas in Maine over the pole to work Asia. And, it's just basically line of sight from some of these other locations like Arizona. So you can virtually work Asia all day long from Arizona and California, where you can't do that from Maine. But we can work Europe all day long, where the bulk of the amateurs are. We can do that from Maine more readily than a station can from Arizona or California.
So what do you hear from most of your customers? Are they getting involved because they want DX, they want a contest, or are they in an HOA and they can't put up an antenna? Or do people actually look at it and say, I don't want to invest, $10,000 into a setup at home, so I'll work with Beloud. What do you hear?
We get all of the above. But most of our clientele, we don't have young kids that are renting stations. Now, we do occasionally we do make our station. We involve young people in our contest efforts to promote the hobby to young people. But we have, most of our clients are older people who have almost concluded their careers, their work careers, or have concluded their careers. Many are living in condominiums where they can't put up an antenna, retirement centers, or retirement communities with a strict covenants. We have people who physically can't build stations, and the cost of hiring somebody to do that is not cheap. We have people that don't have the wherewithal financially to build stations like that, but they do have the ability to rent those stations, and they can afford that much easier than they can to construct those stations. So, it comes down sometimes, not always, but it comes down sometimes to a matter of math. What's it going to cost me at age 65 or whatever to build this station, and how long do I think I'm going to live, and how long is it going to take me to get my ROI? And so if I build it myself, in some cases people tell themselves, it's actually cheaper to rent than it is to build, and you don't have the maintenance of the stations and that sort of thing. You also have the ability to rent these different stations that are out there at different geographic locations. And you also have the what they would call in the hobby the DX experience, where you're operating from the other side of the microphone. So it's one thing to operate from, not to belittle Indiana, but it's one thing to operate from Indiana, and it's another thing to operate from an island someplace. Okay, so if you are more rare, or if you are, there are a lot more people who want to work you in Bonaire, for example, or from any island where there might be a de-expedition, a group of guys going and activating a station on an island on a temporary basis for 2 weeks. They're in high demand because of the award systems that are out there available. That guys want to work all countries. They want to work these countries on different bands. So, you can work Indiana every day of the week, but you can't necessarily work Kerguelen Island, or something that's very rare. So, that's an incentive for guys to want to work some of these stations that are better equipped with large amplifiers and high gain antennas. It gives them an opportunity to compete against the other guys that are equally equipped, rather than sit there and battling it out with people for hours and hours and hours using a dipole or a vertical, and maybe never getting the opportunity to break that pile up to work that rare DX station.
Well, I appreciate the work that you and Steve have done. As you know, I use your station in Maine to run the Maine QSO party and then the California QSO party, and I can relate exactly to what you're talking about. I still have my station here. I still do a lot of work with POTA. Those are all fun. But when it came to contesting, there's nothing like getting on either 2B in Maine or 1A and having that big signal. So thank you for that. And I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today. It's been fun. I've learned a lot from you today, but even our prior conversations. So thank you.
I'm happy to do it. It's always good to see you and chat.
Thank you, Fred. I appreciate you joining me today. You've been listening to Fred, WW4LL, avid DXer, competitive contester, and co-owner of Beloud. You can check Beloud out at beloud.us. Thank you again, Fred.
I'm happy to do it. It's always good to see you and chat.
5.9 plus 25 dB.
Okay, Steve, your signal repro is 5/9 plus. Okay.
Yes, you have 20 dB over. 20 dB over. Very, very strong signal.
For the tremendous signal of water, what kind of an antenna you're running there, over?
10 over 9, your local station, 20, sometimes peaking 25 over 9.
QSR, Steve, your report also 59 plus 20 dB from Turkey.
With really good audio. Not hearing much coming out from stateside, but you're very strong.
Right now, you're 59 plus 20 near Paris, QSR.
Yes, Roger, Steve. You're also 5.9 plus 20.
Lima Bravo 5, Golf India, 5.9 plus 10 dB into Norway.